Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to Embrace the Question. We're doing Bible study with me this week, and we are in Genesis chapter 40. This is our 45th lesson in Genesis. Yes, some chapters we spent multiple days on. This one probably could use it, but let me tell you, this is maybe one of my favorite chapters in Genesis. And I've learned a lot, and I'm really itching to share that with you. I'm hoping not to have any interruptions from the cat, who was angry because I threw her out. She wanted to be a part of this broadcast, and truth is she doesn't know nearly as much about Scripture as she thinks. She's really kind of a heathen, and so I had to put her out, kind of like Jesus with the unbelieving. Yeah, you just have to put them out sometimes. Secondly, if you're into coffee like I am, hang around for the end of this video because I have an offer for you. You need to hear about the world's most anointed coffee. They're not sponsoring the video, but this is a friend of mine that's brewing. He's roasting his own coffee beans. He's got his business going, and this is a good project. This is a kingdom thing, so you'll want to hear about that. But hang around for the end, okay? Because that's when I'm going to show you all the goodies. All right, Genesis chapter 40. We're talking about Joseph still. We ended last week with Joseph is unjustly accused of advances on Potiphar's wife. She got angry because he would not return her affections, and she framed him. Basically, she framed him. She got him in a situation where he was the only one in the house with her, so she could make up any story she wants. So she did. She grabbed a hold of his cloak, which he somehow managed to leave in her hands. That's not a good thing. So she had his cloak. Here's proof. Potiphar, I think, really, he's a high up official of Pharaoh. And I really believe, personally, this is Steve here, but I believe Potiphar probably had a really good idea of the type of woman she was. She's unhappy. Some commentators say she was just lonely, right? No, not just lonely. She's a bit lonely. I won't argue that she was lonely, but she was after the affection of other men, particularly Joseph. It says Joseph was a good-looking guy. She wanted Joseph and couldn't have him, so she spitefully framed him. Potiphar had to do something, so it says he put Joseph in prison. Okay, we're going to learn a little bit more about that this week. That's where we left off. Okay, Joseph's in prison, and God's blessing him in prison with the same kind of favor that he had in the house of Potiphar. Remember, he was a servant in Potiphar's house as well. Per Joseph's statement to Potiphar's wife, there is no one in this house that has more authority than I do, not even Potiphar, because he gave me as much authority as he himself had in his own house. The only thing off limits was his wife. And now the same kind of authority has been granted him in prison. He is over most of the prisoners. He is over, I guess, the entirety of the prison. And we're going to learn a little bit about the prison as well. So let's start with Genesis chapter 40 and get into some of this imagery. Okay, for this study, I want to stay with the King James Version with the Strong's numbers. I know it looks cluttered, but this particular lesson really warrants our immediate access to the Hebrew, where we can find it here. And we're not going to examine every crack and crevice of this story because we would be here for a few weeks on this chapter. But we are going to hit up on some things that, I'll be honest, I've never seen them before. So let's start with verse 1. And it came to pass after these things. After what things? After he was thrown into prison and God gave him all this favor in prison. After those things, okay? So after these things, the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. All right, that's kind of a synopsis of what's going on here. We've got the butler and the baker, not the candlestick maker, but the butler. The butler is another name in this case for the wine taster, the cupbearer to the king. We see this played out with Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king during the captivity. Okay, Xerxes' cupbearer. That's what this guy was. And then the baker, the guy that had in some capacity was supplying bread to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the king. Verse 2, and Pharaoh was wroth against the two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. Now, notice that. All of a sudden, it's not just the butler and the baker. Now it's the chief of the butlers and the chief of the bakers. Why is that important? It is important. It's important because we need to know the imagery behind all of this. We look at what chief means. It's the word sar, and you come down here and check out this word here, prince. Master works fine. This is the prince. And that's going to work into our symbolism, our picture that we're creating here. So we have the chief wine tester, or the prince of the wine tasters, the prince of the cupbearers, and the prince of the bakers. Interesting. The prince of the bakers. How does that sound to you? Would you apply for that job? All right. These guys probably had bakers and cupbearers below them that worked. These were, if you will, the last line of defense of shenanigans against Pharaoh. Should anyone be trying to assassinate the king? Okay, so these guys are tasting wine and then handing it up to another guy that will taste the wine. And you would think that, by the time it got to Pharaoh, there wouldn't be anything left in the glass. But we're just talking about guys that tested for poison. All right, and something has gone down. We don't know what. We're not told. Something's gone down, and Pharaoh is angry with his cupbearer and with his baker because apparently something has been, an attempt has been made on his life through these means. One of the actual stories coming down from legend was that and rabbinic legend, is that there was a fly in the wine and perhaps a rock in the bread. All right, the fly in the wine doesn't sound like a major deal, right? It's certainly not an attempt on his life. It's the kind of thing that a king might be upset at. And then we have the rock in the bread. Something like that is far from accidental, okay? So we have a problem immediately with motive. We'll get back to that. Let's go with verse 3. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. Okay, let's talk about that for a minute. He puts them in ward. They're in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. Who's the captain of the guard? Well, a lot of the legend says that the captain of the guard was none other than Potiphar himself. Potiphar was one of the high ups. He was in a powerful position in the government, the cabinet of the king. It's one of his trusted officials. So Potiphar was either the captain of the guard or the captain of the guard worked for Potiphar. The reason why that's important is because I believe that Potiphar is still favoring Joseph. I believe Potiphar is finding out that Joseph is still the best guy for the job. I think Potiphar never really believed that Joseph was guilty, but he's kind of framed. He had to save face doing something. Joseph is, after all, a Hebrew. Potiphar is the superior Egyptian. He's royalty. He had to do something. So he's placed Joseph in a prison, and all of a sudden we find that Joseph is in charge of the prison. This sounds like Potiphar's doing to me. I know that God is sovereign over all of that. It didn't have to be Potiphar, but that's what legend says, so that makes sense to me. Let's point this out too. He put them in a ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison. All right, let's look at prison here. It's the house. It's a house, bait. That's house in Hebrew. That's why we have Bet Lehem, house of bread, or Bet Sefer, house of the book. Okay, house of the captain of the guard into the prison, which is a house, but it's also a sohar, which is the same as a dungeon. And if we look at the root there, the root is sahar, which is round. You've heard of maybe a roundhouse. Think of it as a round pit in the ground. Now, where did Joseph just come from? He came from a pit in the ground, a well, where his brothers had thrown him, and then they raised him up, sold him into the house of Potiphar in Egypt, and now he's again back in a pit. In a manner of speaking, this is the second time that Joseph has descended. Okay, this is his second descension. If you will, the first time he descended into the well, you could easily say that was a death. He went into the pit, and then he resurrected out of that pit into his brother's hands again, who sold him into the hands of the Midianites, and he went to Egypt. So he's already had one death and resurrection. But I think what we're going to have is more interesting than that even, which is multiple dissensions and multiple ascensions. Okay, so I'll elaborate here in just a moment. So Joseph is in charge of this particular pit. He's the master of this pit, right? He's the master of this prison. And the butler, the wine taster, and the baker find themselves in prison with Joseph, where Joseph was bound. So Joseph still finds himself in a house that he doesn't want to be in. And that's important. Joseph finds himself in a house he doesn't want to be in. Let's make a mental note of that. All right. Verse 4. We're plowing right through, aren't we? And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. Okay, so they're in prison with Joseph. Joseph is serving them. He's been charged to take care of them. So Joseph himself is a prisoner, but yet Joseph is caring for these other guys that are in prison. Seems a little bit like the story of Paul and Silas. Paul and Silas is in a prison. They've been unfairly charged and prosecuted and locked up, and now they're in stocks in prison. And they're singing, and there's a great earthquake, and the doors fly open, and the chains fall off, and the jailer is about to kill himself. And they say, no, don't do that. We're all here. And so they go into the jailer's house and minister to the jailer, the prisoners ministering to the jailer. In this case, very much the same thing. Joseph is charged to take care of these guys by the jailer, the captain of the guard, and Joseph is doing it. It's more of a continuation of the blessing of Abraham, where your job is to bless everybody, bless the whole world. And so Joseph is doing that even at a small scale. Okay? Sometimes we don't get to experience the larger scale until we're willing to steward the smaller scale. Verse 5. They're in there for a season. In verse 5. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, the butler and the baker. Both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in prison. It's pretty clunky through the King James with the Strong's numbers. Both of these men, both these prisoners had a dream, both on this same night. And now the continuation is, Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked at them, and behold, they're sad. They're messed up. They don't know why they dreamed their dream, and they don't know what the meaning of the dream is. All right, so Joseph is concerned for them because of their countenance. He asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his Lord's house, saying, Why do you look so sad today? Verse 8. And they said unto him, We've dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me, I pray you. So Joseph is still ministering to them. This sounds a lot, doesn't it, like Daniel? Sounds a lot like Daniel. When Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that troubled him, and he was a king he was a pretty ruthless guy. And Nebuchadnezzar didn't really have a lot of faith in his own magicians. And his magicians were perfectly willing to tell him the interpretation of the dream as long as Nebuchadnezzar would elaborate on his dream. They were lined up to kind of make something up. Nebuchadnezzar's like, nope. If you are who you say you are, then you are going to tell me the dream and then give me the interpretation. And that alone will save your life. And Daniel alone was able to do it because of God's favor. Same thing kind of going on here. We've dreamed a dream, and we don't understand it, and it's disturbed us. And Joseph says, hey, tell me what the dream is. Verse 9, and the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, a vine is before me, and the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters therefore brought forth ripe grapes. What's interesting about that to me is all of the good verbiage, all of the positive symbolism we see. There's a vine, it's sprouted 3 branches, it's budded, there's blossoms, it's producing fruit, it brought forth ripe grapes. That's all positive stuff. And we're going to find out that the outcome, the interpretation, also quite positive. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand. All right, nothing disturbing about that dream. Verse 12, and Joseph said unto him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up your head and restore you unto your place, and you will deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when you were his butler, when you were his wine taster, his cup bearer. You're going to get your job back. You're going to be restored, and everything is going to go back to normal for you. It's all good news, right? And Joseph has a parting word for him. When it's well with you again, think on me, and show kindness, I pray you, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house, because I don't want to be in this house anymore. So when you're restored and you have Pharaoh's ear, tell him, hey, there's a guy down in prison. He is a man of integrity, shouldn't be there. Let's get him out. That's what Joseph's hoping for, okay? Remember, Joseph is in a house he doesn't want to be in. We're going to come back to that. Verse 15, for indeed, he's still explaining, for indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. Okay, he's saying, I've been wrongly accused. I've been stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and that is an interesting reference back to the land of Canaan that he is already labeled the land of the Hebrews. Okay, because remember, Canaan hasn't always been the land of the Hebrews. It was the land of the Canaanites for a good long while. Okay, so that's an interesting distinction. Verse 16, when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. Okay, he's going to go and spill the beans on his dream, because he sees that the other guy got a positive interpretation. It's almost like he wasn't going to participate. He wasn't going to share his dream with Joseph. But since the other guy, since the wine taster got a positive outcome, hey, why not? Let's tell him our dream. So he's like, I had 3 white baskets on my head. I had 3 white baskets. And the word there, kori, you notice one of the things is white bread and basket. So, white baskets, 3 white baskets. And this is a strange word. It's not used very often. We'll come back to that. I have 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket, there was all matter of baked meats for Pharaoh. And the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. Okay, let's stop. Notice the difference in the verbiage between this guy and the wine taster. Wine taster had all positive stuff. This guy, he's viewing himself from outside of his body. He's having an out-of-body experience, which is not good, right? It's kind of what happens when you've died on the table. You have an out-of-body experience. So this guy is kind of having an out-of-body experience, and he's watching things happen to him. And one of the things that's happening to him, he's got 3 white baskets on his head, and the birds are coming and stealing the bread out of the basket, okay? Birds, not always a good symbol in Scripture, not always. In fact, a lot of times they're the thieves. They're the ones that are stealing things and making off with them, okay? They steal seed, they steal bread, they steal meat off King Ahab's table. You get it. The butler, his dream was all from what he saw through his own eyes. I was in my body. I saw a vine. It had 3 branches. It had 3 buds. It was sprouting blossoms. All this stuff he watched with his own eyes. This other guy having an out-of-body experience, seeing things being stolen out of the baskets on his head. Now, what are the baskets? These 3 white baskets, again, white bread. Now, the commentary that I read that is more rabbinic in nature, a lot of it is Talmudic as far as what's the spoken legend handed down. These are pre-law descriptions of matzah. Matzah, unleavened bread. Remember that the law isn't given until 400 years after this, approximately 400 years. So there's no description of unleavened bread until the law is given, and then they are instructed to eat unleavened bread on certain occasions. Before that, there's really not a need to talk about unleavened bread. And this is an Egyptian description of what the rabbis think is unleavened bread. It's white bread and it's flat. Okay, it actually translates to that white stuff. That white stuff. You could almost say kind of like manna. Stuff you'd pick up off the ground. Flaky bread, no leaven. You're probably building a picture of some sort in your head already. That's the fun part. Okay. And Joseph answers and said, "This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets, 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee." "And shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee." Boy, the old interpretation has kind of taken a turn south, has it not? The actual method of execution here, this guy's going to get decapitated. He's going to lose his head, and then they're going to hang his body. Legend, again, states that one of the methods of execution that was employed in Egypt was the impaling of a criminal's body on a stake and posting him outside the gates for all to see. That's what's going to happen to the baker here. We don't know what the baker did, but he was involved in a plot against the king and found guilty. So not a favorable interpretation at all. And it came to pass, the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday. Again, important, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand. So he was restored as prophesied. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them, Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. Forgat him. It's my favorite term. So let's go through this just a little bit and interpret some things that we see. You've no doubt picked up on the imagery of the wine and the bread. So we have the holy sacraments, right? We have the body of Jesus being talked about some 1,000 years or more before Christ. The body and the blood, the wine, the bread and the wine. All right. Why the difference in the outcomes for these two fellows, and why the difference between Joseph, who is our picture, our type and shadow of Jesus, and these other two guys, which also seem to be a type and shadow of Jesus, and why are they found in the same, these multiple types and shadows found in the same story? It can be a bit confusing. So let's just plow through a little bit. The baker is the bread. He's the baker of the bread. Why did the bread have to be destroyed? The same reason the body of Christ was destroyed. It's because the sin of all humanity was judged in the body of Jesus. So the sin of all humanity is placed on Jesus, who is put on a pole, put on a cross, hung, if you will, because everything that is hung is accursed. Our sin was accursed. It was judged and had to be done away with. Such was the fate of the baker. And the birds came and his flesh basically was destroyed. Not a pretty picture, but not really a picture that any of us are unfamiliar with. So explain then the chief butler, the wine taster. What's the deal with the blood? How did the blood survive? The blood is the life. It's the blood that had to ascend. The blood went into the holy place in the heavenlies and was poured out on the heavenly Ark of the Covenant for the propitiation, the removal of all sin. All sin. And that's why the blood, the wine, was raised while the flesh was destroyed. That's the picture of the baker and the chief butler. And both are princes because it's a pointer to Christ. It's a pointer to the Prince of Peace. They too must be high ups. They have to be under the master, if you will. All right, now Joseph, our other parallel picture, type and shadow, he, remember, is in a house. He's in a house that he doesn't want to be in. And I use that term more in context of Joseph's story than of Jesus's story. Jesus was never unhappy being Jesus. Joseph found himself in a house he didn't want to be in because it was, in a sense, a prison. He was, or I guess it was in every sense, a prison, even though he was favored by those above him. Joseph knew he was going to ascend out of that, I think, at some point. That's what his hope was. Now, Jesus knew he was going to ascend, but what did Jesus say? He said, he's talking to his disciples and he says, it's better that I go, meaning it's better that I die so that my spirit can be poured out upon all of you. And so Jesus knew that he was going to die and be resurrected, and then he was going to ascend again. Remember, we talked about multiple descensions. Jesus came to earth. He descended upon earth into the likeness of man. He was fully man. But he also descended into the center of the earth to preach to those in captivity. Then he ascended, and then he ascended. So we have two descensions, two ascensions, as highlighted by this story. Joseph thrown into the pit, comes out, thrown into another pit, goes out. So that's kind of the gist of this entire this entire chapter. It's so chock full of imagery, and we have just barely scraped it. I promise you that. And you, no doubt, see a lot there that we didn't really have a chance to touch on. Okay, I hope I remembered to go back and actually address everything I said we would talk about again momentarily. I hope I managed to do that. So I guess the last thing that we should say about this chapter is the very last verse. They forgot Joseph. You would think that a guy that was really at the end of himself, he's thrown into prison, maybe unjustly, and he finally gets a break. He's told by this stranger that works in the prison that he's going to be restored, and then sure enough, he is restored. You would think that that guy would remember the guy that eased his pain, right? That took the pressure off. But he didn't. It was 2 years later that Joseph is finally remembered. After 2 more years. Again, the numerology is important. And we'll continue the story next week. But now, I told you, if you want the world's most anointed coffee, I have it. Let me show you. This is it, Solway Coffee. You need, let me make sure it's in the screen. Solway Coffee. You see the date on it, 4/20. This is dark Peruvian organic coffee. A friend of mine is doing this now as a kingdom business. He's funding a mission investment to Annandale, Scotland, and he is really trying to get the word out on his coffee. And let me tell you, that's some good coffee. I have a mug right there. So you'll want to actually check this out. I would invite you to get your church credit card and buy a couple of boxes of K-Cups, which are fresh. Get a couple of those for your church, for your Sunday school. And he'll ship them right to you, and they are fresh. A lot of the times, the K-Cups you buy out of the stores, they're 4 months old before they ever hit the shelf because they've been sitting, all that stuff. They've been sitting in the warehouse. These, not so. This is fresh stuff. Tastes good. Like I say, we call it anointed coffee because, hey, coffee's pretty anointed anyway. If you know that about me. You visited the blog. So give this stuff a try. I'll put the link to his website right down here in the notes. Log on, see what he's got. He's got not only Peruvian, but he's got Guatemalan, and he's got K-Cups, he's got whole beans, got ground, all that stuff, man. And some merchandise. So support a guy trying to invest and bless the world. All right. Hope you enjoyed today. I did. Love y'all. I will see you very, very soon. Peace.